And we're live.
Hello, everyone. So today, good day for freedom and Tamara Lich as she's been released from prison. Bad day for people. Only the small minority of people who eat food. Everyone else is fine. Wyatt, I know personally you do photosynthesis for your meals, so you're going to be good. But the rest of us food eaters are going to be in for a really bad time with the new Trudeau policies. But I think the most important story of the day, it's good to be back on the air, is Tamara Lich is free today. The judge has basically said what we've all been saying is this is ridiculous. And no, she goes free and basically got in fights with the prosecutor because if you are someone who believes in the honor and integrity of the legal system in any way, I got to imagine how irking it is for you to watch a obviously politically directed, heavily financed, malicious prosecution that is flimsy on facts and high on like political rhetoric. I think you pointed out well in the article that the judge was shutting down all these arguments of like, oh, are you really Métis? And like that's.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you had a lot of moments where it's kind of funny. We've kind of jumped back and forth between terrible judges and half decent judges, and then another pretty bad judge, and now like our best judge because we started out with that literal former Liberal candidate and big donor. Then we jumped over to the person who released Tamara Lich the first time, who kind of slammed her a little bit, where he would sort of unjustifiably, almost like he was signaling to the media that, don't worry, I still think Tamara is not perfect, but she shouldn't be in prison. And then when they had that Canada-wide arrest warrant against Tamara and she was rearrested and brought back to Ottawa, then you had that guy basically saying, you're flaunting your freedom with your bail conditions and stuff like that. It was horrifically ridiculous, even though he still pointed out the prosecutor as being overly zealous. And then when it comes to this guy, he's just really not playing the whole media circuit game where he's just like, okay, well, you're saying that she went to the awards show and just talked like for 2 seconds with Tom Marazzo. Can you prove that anyone in this situation believed that was actually like a bail violation? Because you can't have someone making these almost bail violations where they like tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, good to see you, and then walk away and pretend like we've somehow committed a crime or we've somehow made a substantial violation. The judge was done with that. He was pointing out that they couldn't prove that there was any sort of knowing violation of bail, and that the prosecution was sort of there just kind of trying to create legal theater by saying, oh, is your husband unvaccinated, Tamara? Or are you really Métis? Well, didn't you lead an insurrection? It's like several times the judge just said, stop. We're just going to get back on what the actual facts are. Stop going into the weeds of whether or not you personally think Tamara Lich is a good person or not. Like, so this guy seems to be like the way I want him. He's not an activist on behalf of anyone. He's just wanting to say, okay, what's the law here? Can you prove your case, or we're just leaving? And Tamara doesn't have to prove anything. She just has to she just has to say that like the prosecution hasn't proven she violated her bail conditions in any substantial way.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's how it should be. And another thing I'll point out before we get into the weeds of it is the fact that he was able to make a decision on the day of, like most of these things. This isn't like rocket science. This is, and my favorite part of the whole thing is when he pointed out, "Oh, this is sedition. Didn't you lead a riot and an insurrection? Aren't you the lead?" And he's like, and the judge was like, "We're talking about mischief. She's being charged."
He basically leans back and it's like, "Is she being charged with inciting a riot?" And they're like, "Well, no." And it's like, "Well, move on."
Move on, yeah. So this is what a judge should be. It's like, no, you're putting her in jail for mischief. So what? Stick to the topic of mischief, which is like a great troll in a lot of ways. But it's not a troll. It's like this is what he should be doing because Tamara Lich is being sent to jail for mischief, like no one else in Canada has before. And the judge is saying, okay, if you're going to throw her in jail for mischief, let's talk about mischief. How mischievous was she? And they were unable to prove that, and he was able to free her within the day. Unlike the other judges, even the one who freed her had to spend an entire week thinking about this. I didn't have the courage to just say, okay, this is nonsense. Like,
and that whole hearing that happened back in the day, it was kind of like, well, she is a bad person, and I think she did do bad things with the Freedom Convoy, but should she be in prison? It was sort of like that. It's like, it's not really your place here to pontificate with whether or not you like the Freedom Convoy. Is it legal or is it not, or is it illegal? And is there any risk that if she's let out of prison, will she pull out another Freedom Convoy from her pocket and go occupy Montreal? It made no sense. Like usually when you let someone out on bail, like even someone who's charged with murder will be let out on bail if the facts of the case prove that they really would have no motive to go reoffend, like they murdered someone who they had a passionate hate for based on what the prosecution is alleging. Okay, fair enough. They're probably not just going to go randomly, shoot up an airport. So they are allowed to get out. With Tamara, it made like no sense because it's like, what is she going to do? One, it's not even proven what she did was illegal. And even if somehow protesting the government was illegal, there's no plans that she has any other reason to go out and start another protest.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's like, and also like bail in Canada, bail's a joke, right? Like, yeah, it's so easy for murderers, even the most heinous crimes, get bail all the time. And even when people like there are reasons to deny people sort of full bail, like if they have resources and ability to flee the country. So if they have the resources to immediately cut Meng Wanzhou, cut bait and run. Right, but even then, you let them out of jail and you put an ankle bracelet on them. You say, okay, you're an ankle bracelet's on you. If you're spotted at the airport, something or whatever, but you're out of jail because we're not doing this, and you can go about that's tradition. What happened?
They placed Meng Wanzhou under house arrest. Was house arrest not even good enough for Tamara Lich? What was the actual risk here that any Canadian had to fear her? And usually bail conditions as well, it's either it's that you can get on the person could possibly get on a private jet and flee to Curacao or something like that, or they've proven themselves to be irrationally violent and willing to commit a crime again as soon as they're let out. That's when you don't deny someone bail, where it seemed like every judge was moving heaven and earth to keep her in prison, as well as the prosecutor. And there was just no, seemingly in the legacy media, no comprehension that shouldn't we be a little bit concerned with so many of these people being either former Liberal candidates or the prosecutor himself,
Karma G.
Yeah, Karma G. He donated $17,000 to the Liberal Party of Canada. And federally, I think everyone knows the maximum donation you can make in a given year to any entity, not individual entities, but to, even if you only donated $1, it doesn't matter, right? You can only donate $1,625 to any political entity every year, and that's a full amount. It's not like you can donate $1,625 to a bunch of different candidates or parties. No, that's all you can spend every year. And he was somehow able to give the Liberal Party over $17,000. That's a decade of donating to the Liberal Party. And we think that this guy's going to be nonpartisan when he's prosecuting Tamara Lich, who is clearly going up against Justin Trudeau in the protest that she helped organize.
All right, Lisa was right. She's never in prison. She was in jail. Splitting hairs. But yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking of prison as the place of I'm locked up.
Yeah, jail is okay. She was in jail. So they put her in jail for longer than she spent more time in jail than I think everyone in Canadian history combined cumulatively has spent in jail / prison for the crime of mischief.
Well, even if she was convicted, how much time could they actually make her spend? Because I guarantee you, the amount of time that you'd have to spend in prison for a mischief charge, if they could even prove it, is less than 30 days. And I think the fact that they were putting out these Canada-wide warrants and going after her in these really obtuse ways just demonstrates that they know that they can't convict her. So they're kind of legally harassing her and almost using bureaucracy to torture her into potentially taking a plea. Knowing Tamara, I don't think she'd ever actually take that. I think she'd fight it out as long as she could. But that's really all the prosecution has left, is of just absolutely running her through the legal system over and over again until she's just I want to see my grandkids. I'll say I'll cop to the lowest possible charge, and then they'll let her go, claiming victory.
Yeah, I mean that I mean we've called that from the beginning. I can't remember which one of us wrote an article about that. That essentially, okay, so this is the Crown's game, is pile on a bunch of BS charges and get Tamara, someone, to plead out to a guilty plea and a slap on the wrist, but then be able to use that to justify everything they've done. And that's what they did sort of to Freedom George, is they kept him in jail for, I don't know, months and months and months, and then got him to say, yeah, sure, guilty of inciting to a crime, I'm guilty of telling people that to protest. Okay, right? But then Glenn McGregor gets to go and say, you're guilty of X, Y, and Z. How do you feel about being guilty of X, Y, and Z? right? And then, the media is like, well, Freedom Convoy organizer, guy who didn't organize the Freedom Convoy, pleads guilty to charges relating to the Freedom Convoy. So then my left-wing aunts and stuff go, oh my God, see, there were charges and they were guilty of the Freedom Convoy charges. And these same people who usually have functioning brains, except sometimes they break down. All you have to do is take this, is like, there is a black teenager, a 19-year-old black teenager, accused of mischief charges and sent to jail and then being let out. And then he's caught jaywalking at 2 a.m. at night. And part of his bail condition is that he can't do any more crimes. And jaywalking is a crime, right? So we throw him back in jail. And everyone in Canada would be like, this is horrible, it's racist, it's not what the justice system is used for, right? The same people saying, well, the laws are the laws when it comes to Tamara Lich, right? These exact same people.
There were so many of those people who were covering the court, the trial today had to respond to, no, but you don't understand. It's okay to keep her in prison without bail because she's a real criminal. I'm like, they're just kind of using the rhetoric of real criminal without any notion of whether or not she's actually convicted. Like, there's people out there, I guarantee you, who if you asked her, has she been charged or convicted, they're like, of course she's been convicted, she's a terrorist. But the thing that really grossed me out is people like the weasels like Glenn McGregor on Twitter, who after she was by the judge said, yeah, this has all been unjustifiable, it's been very inappropriate that we've been holding you in prison. He was literally like, oh, as she's walking out of the courtroom, you can hear the leg chains around her jingling as she leaves. I'm like, yeah, you seem to be getting a little bit too much like self-pleasure from her being locked up, Glenn. Like, you need to maybe take a little bit of a mini vacation. You're a little bit too invested in this grandmother staying in prison.
Yeah. You just made me go to check Glenn McGregor's page before my computer destroys itself. He's having a field day on Twitter. Just get her. Not giving the same list of individuals, defensive.
Métis woman let out of prison, Glenn McGregor most affected. Oh, now I almost have to go and tweet that. Whatever. People have already heard it now. Now I'd just be being a hack if I did it. I might still do it, but don't check. No, but there's so many people in the media who just don't understand actually how news works. People think of fake news, and I might make a video on myself about this later on when I cover specific journalists from Global News, Rachel Gilmore. But some people on the right don't end up understanding what fake news is. Fake news is sometimes things that are just outright false. It's complete misinformation. There's no factual basis to it. And then there's fake news where, yeah, technically you're correct that happened, but it's not news. And it's like what Rachel Gilmore did the other day, where she said, oh, you know that Russia Today was the news outlet that covered the Freedom Convoy the most? I'm like, okay, maybe I don't even think that's true, because I guarantee you certain independent media organizations were covering it multiple times a day.
Russia Today was like covering it, but like I was there on the ground filming it for hours, so I think we probably beat out Russia Today's.
She's using a specific. Oh, they wrote the most bulk amount of articles or do the most individual news segments. But even that.
But doesn't that
who gives a crap?
Isn't that a self-indictment in a way of global and the Canadian news media that they didn't cover it as much as
even here, it's like, who cares? Like, what does it prove? If anything, it shows Russia sucks, and Putin will point to another world leader messing up more than him in order to make him seem pretty decent. It's like how I guarantee you the Global would say, well, you know that China's criticizing us on climate change to indict Canada. Yet when it's Russia, now it's to indict the movement that's that's happening. It's ridiculous. And then they also, in the same article, Rachel Gilmore then says, Fox News was the second most. I'm like, oh yes, the news organization that you believe is run by Hitler covered it. Like she just said that as if I'm supposed to be like crying and like sobbing because Fox News covered it. Like, what is she even talking about? It's just innuendo that she's using it. Like, that Fox News covered it. Like, what does that mean, Rachel? And, she probably never will explain herself, but that's what actual fake news is. It's technically true. It's also not actual news.
Yeah, it's like building a message and fear mongering, right? Like, well, corn, number one food of rapists. It's like, okay, maybe.
I guarantee you the media, or someone at least in the media, like the legacy media, will try and cover this judge who let her out and try and find that he is somehow a conservative bias. despite the fact that they've been then trying to act skeptical around all of the clearly true allegations that different judges and the prosecutor in this case have been very closely tied in with the Liberals. It's what you would call selective skepticism, where whenever certain journalists, when the Freedom Convoy is happening, covered something that the Freedom Convoy organizers said, they would always then bring in someone from the Anti-Hate Network or bring someone in from the police who didn't even have any information to contradict what the organizers were saying, to say, we're skeptical about what they're saying. This might not be true. But if the police say something, they'll never say, oh, but the organizer said that this wasn't true and they can prove it. They would never go to them. They'll be skeptical about only people they dislike. And if they like certain groups within a situation, because to a certain extent, the left doesn't even like the police. If the police say something against an organization that they dislike, immediately there's zero skepticism. We are fully on board. How could it possibly be wrong? It's the police.
Yeah, and it's like, well, the police are saying, I mean, I was there when watching people get arrested. It's like the media, like during the last stand of the Freedom Convoy, when, you know, civil rights, what are those? And people were just being beaten willy-nilly while trying to remain peaceful. You had independent journalists behind the protesters, like Andy Lee got pepper sprayed. I didn't get pepper sprayed, but I could taste pepper spray in the air at points. And we were sort of getting in and trying to get footage of the cops in the last stand and the protests and what was happening, people getting dragged away, and then filming people getting pepper sprayed. And that's where we were, just showing exactly what was happening. And I think that's why people liked the independent media coverage better, because you could see exactly what was happening live, unedited from us. And then we saw, well, this crazy shit is going down. The mainstream media is behind the police officers in this closed off thing, having coffee, not covering the action. And then when someone's getting pulled behind the lines, when the police would beat someone and pull them behind the lines, then they come and they show that person being dragged away to do the sort of arrest has been made. There's been 70 arrests by the police. This must be very violent because the police are arresting a lot of people. And that's what, you know, my, you know, aunts and uncles in Toronto get to see, is like, oh, 75 arrests are made. Instead of like watching what I was doing and saying, well, here's the anatomy of how these arrests are going down. Here's a person standing on a bank of snow singing "O Canada." Here's a police officer clubbing them in the legs, pepper spraying them, and then dragging them behind the line. And all these people were arrested and then released right afterwards, right? So none of these arrests stuck, but the media got their narrative of 75 arrests or whatever number of arrests were made. They didn't show the anatomy of the arrests. They just, you know, pushed the numbers. And, you know,
that's the definition of fake news. It's not factually incorrect. A certain amount of people were arrested, but why? There can't just be the people arrested and it's like, okay, well, that's not a news story. It's what tabloids do. Tabloids technically do publish things that are real, but it's the, why am I hearing this and why am I only hearing this much of the story? Or even just the fact, it's like if I went around recording someone every single time they said something that was untoward or rude or vulgar, and then I just compiled a whole video of it. It would make them seem like a pretty terrible person, but it's not real news because you could do that to anybody. It makes them look really bad, and it would probably get shared a lot if it was a particularly famous person, but it's also not news in any substantial way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's how to build a narrative and all that. Yeah, and it's and then lies by omission, like what are we not putting out? There's 1,000 different ways that
even this trial, the way that the media was setting it up is that Tamara was denied bail, so she's already on the outs. She's the one that has to prove herself that she should be let back out. The media was making it as if Tamara had been proven in court to actually be some sort of public danger or risking like starting up another freedom convoy in any second, simply because the last judge was being obtuse. And now they're probably publishing stories, and I can kind of confirm it because I was reading them, of it being kind of shocking that she was let out this time. I was like, no, but if you're paying attention, you would have understood that last time it was very much the judge even admitting that the prosecution doesn't have a lot here, but that he just has a bad feeling about Tamara, so he's not going to let her out. That was pretty much how the last one went. It was ridiculous, but you would never get that from the actual media if you read into anything that they wrote about it. They basically just wrote the result of the trial, not how the judge got to that result, in which anyone would have been confused if they tried to follow the logical trail.
Yeah, I mean, let's just go. I'm gonna go off the beaten path here, and okay, boom, screen goes dead now. Like, we have known Tamara since before the convoy. We knew her when she was working with the Maverick Party, and so she was our contact within the Maverick Party when we would go. Is there a political organization? We're a news organization, so we would talk to them, and Tamara is the person we talked to, and Tamara had watched my show before and watched this show, so we had a relationship with Tamara Lich before the Freedom Convoy. And I spoke to her when she was there and got to know her a bit in person and speaking to people around her. I will say this. The fears over Tamara Lich are the most unfounded thing there ever was. And if they were smart, they would never put Tamara Lich in prison. They would never put any conditions on her. The way to tamp down this movement is to let Tamara speak for an extended period of time. And not that she's a bad speaker or anything, but Tamara is never going to incite a revolution with a speech. Tamara is about peace and love and spirituality. If you gave Tamara 20 to 30 minutes on a microphone, she would tell everyone to remain calm and to believe and positive vibes. And this, that all being true, and this is like, that's a nice thing to say, but like, no one's going to storm anything or organize or get to the streets under the message of good vibes.
She'd be one of the first. She'd be one of the first people to come out and denounce someone who was attempting to do that, and good for her.
Like Tamara's of the opinion that like if everyone was just like meditated and had good vibes and thought good thoughts, like we could all fix this. And like it's not wrong to think that, like that is not untrue, that if everyone was to be in a positive mindset, the world would be a better place. But it's not, the cold hard reality of what's going on. So by turning Tamara Lich into a figurehead and a martyr and in jail, she is a much more powerful lightning rod of revolution as a silent martyr in a jail cell than she ever would be on the streets. So like my advice to Justin Trudeau, if he's watching, which I'm pretty sure he is, because I'm sure this is probably his favorite show. What else would he be watching? My advice to Justin Trudeau would be stop this on Tamara, never put her back in jail, drop the charges and then let her talk. And just let her talk, and she'll tell everyone to calm down and think good thoughts. And then people like us won't be able to say Tamara's in jail. This is a horrible breach of liberty.
And this is the strategy that they were having. And I know a lot of people wanted us to cover it. And to be fair, I'd say that I'd admit that I never did want to cover it, or I never ended up covering it ever, simply because it really goes into the weeds a lot. The reason that they had someone like Pat King locked up is because if anyone's ever met Pat King, if anyone's ever had to deal with Pat King, especially before the Freedom Convoy, and I've had to deal with him a little bit, he is a nutcase. Like, I can feel bad for him that he was locked up for as long as he was, and it was unjustifiable. He had like literally no real organizational power inside the Freedom Convoy, had pretty much nothing to do. He was literally driving in and out of the city of Ottawa while the Freedom Convoy was happening because he really had no connection on the ground to anyone. So he was just kind of jumping in and out.
But
and that's really all he had.
But by the end of it, he had alienated so many people by just saying things that were objectively not true. And then it's like sometimes he'd find out where like some people were organizing meetings, and he'd like barge in there and like make an ass of himself, and like say
like there's a lot of people associated with the convoy, and people might have good impressions of them because they were locked up. And I don't doubt it was wrong for them to be locked up. I know a lot of people who know Pat. They're like friendly guy. Also, will just randomly say something that will like get like a right-wing watch or hate, like anti-hate on them in a justifiable way, in the sense that I hate anti-hate, but it gives anti-hate an excuse to try and smear the Freedom Convoy. When Pat starts talking about like white identity theories and stuff like that on live streams, and it's like, man, it was so easy for the prosecution to keep him in prison unjustifiably, because in the courtroom he will say things that implicate him in an actual crime that he never even committed.
Yeah, that's a Pat King thing. Is Pat King will cop to crimes he never committed in like it's like again he just says
he is the type of guy before the Freedom Convoy who would pretend to be a wounded veteran.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing though. It goes to bashing Rachel Gilmore, which you like. In her article about the Freedom Convoy organizers and trying to smear everyone, she points to the Pat King video in which he talks about the Anglo-Saxon bloodline and how COVID is meant to depopulate the Anglo-Saxon bloodline, which is the best bloodline, and blah blah blah. It's like yes, that's obviously wrong and that is racist. Like people are equal. There is no like pure bloodline of whatever. As long as you're not inbred, your bloodlines are all equal. Like that's generally how these things work. But she then goes on to say, and then he went on about how this was being orchestrated by people named Ahmed or Mahmoud, like to imply he's Islamophobic and all this. That's not what he said, although that's a kind of what he said. This is a wide thing. He went on to say that this was being conducted and run by Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was the former president of Iran, which and again, this kind of shows you the fake news. So Rachel Gilmore clearly watched that video, and either she's too stupid to know who Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is, or she's willfully malicious in the way she presents news. And she knew that if she said, truthfully, he went on to say this was being directed by the former prime minister of Iran.
Or Pakistan.
This is an insane person, right? And people would read that and go, oh, this person's just not right in the head. Like, he probably didn't organize this because he thinks Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is in charge of the world's COVID policy. That's a crazy thing. But she changed it to be like, then he went on, how about this is being directed by people named Mahmoud or Ahmed? It's like, no. He said, clearly said Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who has no power over anything, not even in Iran. Like, you could argue even in Iran, the president is a puppet of the Ayatollah.
Yeah, what I would say with Pat as well is that I'd say that he's probably even just a nice guy if you meet him. He's extremely easily corrupted by attention, in the sense he will keep saying things that get him attention. Again,
most people are.
I'm not trying to run a guy down based on nothing, because like, oh, I'm jealous or something. Before the Freedom Convoy, when he was really not nearly as big as a name as he is currently now, he would just randomly pretend to be a wounded veteran, was never part of the military, was never wounded, to get money from people to basically buy cigarettes and alcohol. Really wasn't much of a brain trust. And then he would go and try and like co-opt a bunch of native people sitting on like the legislative steps of like the Alberta legislature, and then get them in trouble. And they're even telling him, hey, get out of here. And like, you'd have cops walking up to him, begging Pat to stop like standing on the legislature grounds, because they'll have to arrest him, and they're totally fine with him coming back every day, but he can't, just sleep there in a tent, whatnot. He's just never been someone who's exactly a great tactician in any way. But what a journalist like Rachel Gilmore will do, and this is what I want to touch on in a video of my own on the subject, is that she'll do what I call a drive-by shooting type of article, where she'll name a couple people who are legitimately either unstable, or they say stupid things, or they legitimately have bad views. And then they'll lump them in with a bunch of people who did basically nothing wrong. And then she'll just drive by and shoot down everyone and pretend like, well, no, I got Jeremy McKenzie, so it's all fine and dandy. And because he's not a good guy, it's okay if I attack, Chris Barber or Benjamin Dichter, or I attack Tamara Lich, or I attack this person. And it's like going after just everyone and anyone and everyone, and then declaring it moral because at least I got one bad guy.
Is it Sargon Akkad who would be like dirty, dirty smear merchants? Is that his line?
Yeah.
On this? Yeah, I think that fits the Rachel Gilmore MO. Dirty, dirty smear merchants. Yeah, you read the article, and it was like, if you know, like, yeah, it was designed to panic yuppie urbanites over nonsense in a willfully malicious way. And this is like, again, this is why people call the media fake news, and they get away with the technical. Was I lying? He did say Mahmoud. It's like, but you're lying by, you knew the story. You knew he said Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Like, he was putting COVID, like he was saying that the former president of Iran was directing this. And like, not even the most recent former, like we're at Rizvi, we're Rouhani, like, and Ahmadinejad. So not even the most recent one. It was just like the only Iranian president
anyone remembers. Yeah.
Like, so like, it's so clearly like, this is, what I mean, there's, yeah. So we got the different types of fake news. So all in all, very good. There has been released.
I just want to grab one more question before we move on to the fertilizer story. Yeah, Cheryl Dawn was just asking, how come, because I just mentioned him briefly, how come Dichter wasn't arrested too? And I think this is something that way too many people make a big deal about. He, at the time, from everything I know, Benjamin Dichter had like broken his ankle, and he was essentially in a hotel room. So, and what I was told was that he actually,
yeah, I was there. And I can tell you, okay, there's a couple reasons there, and you're hitting on it. Okay, so there one possible explanation is Ben Dichter knew what was going to happen beforehand because, he was feeding the convoy and everyone, like, again, there were police and politicians leaking stuff to him. So he knew, he was out there. And Ben was smart enough that he knew that the government would come after them, that he got different lawyers in the JCCF. I spoke to him of this, and he was not impressed with the JCCF's legal prowess. They're not known as the best lawyers. They defend the people who need defending, but Ben paid for real high quality lawyers and was fully lawyered up and had lawyers in contact with the police.
I believe that they even attempted to try and take out a nonsense arrest on him, and then as soon as that happened, they were essentially said back off because they could actually like take our badges from us because they know what they're doing.
Yeah. So also the other thing is Ben had a fully broken ankle and like could not walk. So he was in a hotel room. So when Tamara and Chris started getting arrested and they declared the red zone North Korea, said you don't have any civil rights within these few blocks. Chris and Tamara were out on the streets. So when they were walking on the streets of North Korea or the red zone in Ottawa, the police could just come pick them up and arrest them. Whereas Ben, who could not walk, was confined to his hotel room. So it's a whole other thing to go into a hotel room, like without a warrant, break down someone's door in a Canadian hotel room and drag them out on the arrest of no charges. So there's one.
I think Karen by the Redu also makes a good observation. She's like, also Marazzo was never arrested, and he actually did not have a broken ankle and was more presently on the ground on the day of. And that's not a point against him. It just sometimes the police don't go up and round up every single person like it's the end of The Godfather. They picked a couple of most name-worthy people and then ran away.
So Marazzo wasn't really a figurehead until after the convoy or to the very end, because he was sort of like, he made the press conference as like sort of the last man standing there. As the original press conferences were Tamara, Chris, and Dichter. So those were the three they wanted at the time. And then all the bail conditions, right? And then they sort of piled on. Then they tried to make Pat King an organizer. And because Tom Marazzo was last man standing and got some, he wasn't put under like any of the injunctions, so he was allowed to talk afterwards. He was able to sort of fill the void.
And that's something that Benjamin Dichter was also trying to avoid, was getting arrested so that they could slap him with a bunch of nonsense like gag orders. So then he wasn't able to speak, because it's, even though a lot of people in a certain sense symbolically think that, oh, if you were arrested, you're legit, and if you aren't legit. There's utility in not being arrested so that you can continue talking about the issues. And so that's what a lot of people probably were trying to avoid. And even then on the ground, you even saw people like Daniel Bulford, who did great work for helping like the organizers and advising and whatnot. He had to like beg the police to finally arrest him to prove how ridiculous the arrest warrants were. They just probably hadn't taken anything on Daniel out. So he was running around saying, hey, arrest me. Aren't I an organizer? And they just like, we just don't have anything on you. It's like, assume that the police are more incompetent than people are somehow in league with the police.
Yeah. There is some incompetence and malice going on from the top, and this is being directed top down. Yeah. So there's, it's, I think the biggest reason is because he had a broken leg and he was in a hotel room. Because
and they would have needed a warrant then to go up to that room and kick down the door, and they didn't even know exactly which hotel room he was in at the time. It would have been it would have also looked really bad because he could have just filmed them breaking into his hotel room to arrest him, and that would have been much clearer footage than even what they had for Tamara Lich.
Yeah,
Leach. Sorry, people are on me in the chat, rightfully so. I keep saying her last name wrong. Leach. I did it right.
Tamara. Yeah. So that's. I think the biggest. I think the biggest reason was he was in a hotel room, so he was like on private property, whereas Tamara and Chris were mobile, so they sometimes stepped onto public property, so the police could come snatch them. Now, none of it was legal, but it's another step of, the hotel he was staying at. Like they have civil. Like once you start, like if you were to arrest someone in a major hotel chain in Canada without a warrant under thing, like. Then you're like sort of violating the sanctity of their private. Then you've got like the lawyers of that hotel company.
Yeah.
And those lawyers, like those guys are not your $250 an hour lawyers. Those are your like $1,250 an hour lawyers who are like,
yeah. Okay, so it's sort of something like, I don't know which hotel he was in, but it's like if you broke into the Marriott now has a reason to want to go after the police, because now the Marriott, if they don't fight back, it's set the precedent that the police can just kick down the door of your hotel room and arrest you for basically no reason.
Yeah, and it's one thing to go up against the JCCF. It's another thing to go against, 5 sharks and an entire team of paralegals and whatever, and all of them, with a major corporation like the Marriott who could pay the $10,000 an hour that would all cost and find it worth it to do so. So there's whole other because again, none of what they're doing is ever going to stick and legal in any sort of way. But the way the Crown wins is a war of attrition, is saying, okay, you're out of funds, you can't fight us anymore, you have to cop to something. Whereas the Marriott, they're not going to run out of funds. And I'm not saying he was staying in the Marriott. That's just the example you gave.
Okay. So, very, very, very last thing, just because Karen again had another good question. I don't believe actually any independent journalists were arrested or charged. And again, I think that it'd almost be like the police were probably specially told not to arrest any independent journalists, because that would have been way worse than anything else.
Andy had her bank accounts frozen, and Alexa was shot in the leg with a tear gas canister.
And those were massive stories, and they didn't even get arrested.
Yeah, they didn't get arrested. So it's not like they were super kind to the journalists. I mean, again, Alexa was shot in the leg, and Andy was had her bank accounts frozen. But yeah.
Yeah, but definitely the police were probably attempting not to arrest any independent journalists, or that would have been probably one of the biggest stories to come out of it.
Yeah, and they did rough up some live streamers, but
little bit different.
On that. So let's move to the bad news of the thing is not going to be a good winter for the Western world. Winter is going to be hard. And Canada has decided to join. Trudeau's decided to basically say, you know what? Hyperinflation is threatening. We're at least at runaway inflation, maybe not hyperinflation. We're not at Zimbabwe yet, but we're at the Weimar Republic, the early stages of that. So inflation is getting out of control. So everything's going up in price. So I'm not going to reduce the carbon tax because that would help people out. And currently in the Netherlands, there's massive protests against nitrogen reduction caps on the farmers, because the farmers are saying we can't farm food out at the policies you're dictating us to. Also, Sri Lanka overthrew their government for similar policies. And Justin Trudeau has decided, you know what, with the war between Russia and Ukraine, and those two countries being some of the major food suppliers and wheat suppliers of the world, what better time to heavily compromise our food security by instituting these insane ESG, environmentalist, carbon, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, it's nitrous oxide emissions reductions, which effectively just means stop using fertilizer, because the only thing that really is a major producer of nitrous oxide on farmland is fertilizer going onto crops and then releasing it into the nitrous oxide into the atmosphere after it rains and it gets wet, and that's kind of how it works. So when they're saying that they're going after emissions, they're really just going after fertilizer, because that's the only thing on a farm that's actually producing any of it in a substantial manner. And yeah, this is exactly, and it's down to the 30% that they want to reduce emissions by, is exactly what they attempted to do in the Netherlands and Sri Lanka. And personally, I think Trudeau's almost doing this in just trying to get in almost solidarity with different internationalist type leaders around the world to sort of prove he's sort of still part of the club.
Yeah. I mean, the article I'm working on, when my computer is not dying and turning itself off, I'm essentially arguing that it doesn't matter why he's doing it. I think this is not the time to question why. I actually do think this is the time on this particular, because we have half an hour to get into it. So we get into it here. But I think the real important thing is it doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter if Klaus Schwab is coming to his office directly and saying, Justin Trudeau, stop the farming. I spoke to Larry Fink and it's no more food. It doesn't matter if that's the reason. It doesn't matter, the example I use, if he's just simply, what you kind of think, what we probably think it's closer to is he's just a lemming. He's following the other lemmings off a cliff here. Is someone said eco, green, climate change, and his brain just shut off, and he's just a lemming off the cliff. And
I don't think people realize, because I think people tend to, again, like you always talk about, believe in conspiracies of competence, when really most people are sort of, who are world leaders who are doing these sorts of things, are really just part of conspiracies of incompetence, where it's a lot of people who just genuinely believe all this environmentalist climate change nonsense, to the point where it's almost like their minds are so pickled, they look at nitrous oxide emissions as literally more dangerous than potentially harming the food supply of the world.
Yeah, and the food supply of the world in a time when the food supply of the world is already compromised. Like there's already droughts and some crops have failed in other parts of the world, and Russia and Ukraine are heading to a war and winter. So there's going to be major hits, and now, like, food is important. 4 to 5 dentists recommend that you eat food. The problem with, we can say politics, society, or something, is when things go wrong, people tend to get insular and hoard when it's not the best way to get out of a problem. Like, when we share and trade with each other, we actually all get more through the process of specialization. So when Canada and Ecuador share food, we're actually increasing the net food for both countries in a way, by the way you specialize and do that. The problem is when things get tight and problems start to happen, countries get protectionist by impulse when they should be, working together more. But once one person starts the cascade, everyone then gets a bit protectionist. So you're facing a problem even before Trudeau's nitrous oxide reductions, where we are facing in the prospect of maybe countries getting protectionist on the food supply. This is a time where you do not want to have a compromised domestic food supply. Like, this is when you should be at maximum output of domestic food supply. Maximum. Like, absolute maximum, pushing to the limit. And we have a leader who should understand this and is going the opposite way. So this is why I actually, like, again, you quoted me quite well. I don't believe in conspiracies of competence. I believe in conspiracies of mass incompetence, is generally how I phrase this. But here, I do detect some anti-human malice within Justin Trudeau here, because extreme incompetence doesn't explain this one. Like, he's not as stupid as we claim him to be all the time. Like, he is a man of somewhat average intelligence, right? Who's been raised to believe he's above average, but he's not. Like, this is kind of what we're dealing with. And the more I kind of pontificate on this, you go, okay, he knows about Russia and Ukraine. He knows they're both big food suppliers. He knows that this went poorly in the Netherlands and there's already mass protests against him. Is he actually trying to instigate some sort of anti-Trudeau protest to say, this is another freedom convoy, give me back my emergency powers? Like, is there some sort of...
I kind of argued that. I kind of argued that in a little bit of a way in an article I recently wrote. But my thing is with it is almost like he just needs the attention to a certain extent. He didn't like how the Freedom Convoy went, so he wants someone else to pick a fight with, because throughout Trudeau's entire tenure, it's always been him picking fights with certain groups of people and trying to prove that he's the more moral actor. And I don't think that he's picking this one with the farmers because he thinks he can win it. I think he genuinely thinks he can win any fight that he picks, and he doesn't understand how bad this looks. Also, I think there's a bit of a solidarity play with he wants to potentially push these policies in the future. And if the Netherlands and Sri Lanka and other governments might go down in flames like Italy and whatnot based on these sort of anti-agricultural policies, he's trying to get on board now and push it through now, because he's thinking that in a year's time, it's going to be absolutely impossible, because this is going to be the thing that sends like alarm bells off and even a metropolitan liberal's head of, why are you trying to touch the food supply, kind of a thing. Especially, like, think about it. This is like, if you were trying to pick a fight with vegans, this is the best way you could possibly do it, is go after vegetables. Yeah, I don't know who this appeals to other than people who just react negatively to anyone who's against Trudeau, which is an increasingly small constituency of voters. Like if you see any of the new polling that comes out, I don't really care about the Liberals versus Conservative polling because that's always a little bit transient. It's always rising a little bit for the Conservatives, falling a bit for the Liberals, and it'll be a little bit different next week or next month. What's really bad for Trudeau is that the direction of the country polling of do you think the country's going in the right direction, that's been just like absolutely flatlining. Or when I say flatlining, I mean like falling consistently for the past 2 years. Of people went, yeah, I think he has like my best interest in mind. After the 2021 election, it was around 43% of people who thought we were going in the right direction. It's now 32%. That is no chance at re-election numbers unless something crazy happens.
Yeah, and like I do have significant concerns about winter.
To be fair, these policies are affecting us probably next year because all the fertilizer that people would have usually used has been used. It's more so that the Liberals are doing this now when there isn't that immediate urgency to protest against them because the crops this year are fine. And a lot of people will stop caring about farming issues as it gets cold because they're like, what are you talking about? It's like deep winter. Why should I care about fertilizer? And I think they're hoping that the momentum starts up for a farmers' protest, and then it dies, and then people kind of forget about it, even though it's going to be something that affects them deeply in the future.
But I'm saying globally, my fear is there's going to be a cascade from Europe, like this winter or maybe the spring, like because hard winter and then lack of spring is coming, and then when spring doesn't bring the relief that was planned. So maybe I'm talking about next spring. When
it's a bit of both, I guess. Fair enough.
Yeah, and I'm not thinking this right in Canada. You're right about Canada. You're right, but my fears are more Europe.
Like we won't be able to export. We won't be able to export to help people. Like we will need all the food that we have, and that we're not going to have enough to offset the.
We're not going to have enough food,
deficits.
And we're going to promise to give it away.
Yeah.
We're going to promise to give it away to left-wing leaders who say left-wing things. And then we're gonna start to feel the pain. Like things have a potential to get hyper violent in Europe over this nonsense, because Canada is a very mellow country until we're forced not to be, and you could see in 14 or so months, or in a year from now, the Liberals will be wishing that they had to just deal with everyone will realize how peaceful and tame the Freedom Convoy was, because you'll be facing down the barrel of something that is not it won't be a bunch of people honking and saying peace and love, like just freedom, just give it.
Well, not that you're saying it's going to be like mass violence, but it's going to be farmers like in the Netherlands flat out just saying, I'm just going to flat out block this highway until the government stops. Not I'm going to kind of stay out of the way, stay in downtown Ottawa and be like that. It's like the norm is going to be the bridge blockades along the border and stuff like that.
I think they'll be incredible. I think in 2023 there'll be mass violence across Europe. I do, from all these policies. You saw it in Sri Lanka. I mean, one of the faults of the upper middle class Liberals is they're incredibly racist, and they look at Sri Lanka. And remember, last year Sri Lanka was a great place. 98 out of 100 on their ESG score, guys. 98 out of 100 ESG. Wow, what an amazing place. So ESG compliant. And the thing I'm writing is ESG policy is amazing if your goal is to accrue social credit points at an urban dinner party filled with upper middle class people. It's a great way to do that. Absolutely great way to make friends among lawyers. Fantastic policy for that. The problem is ESG policy does not do well when exposed to a mild dose of reality. Just a mild dose of reality. And that was Sri Lanka. And they did this in Sri Lanka, and people got hungry, and then they got violent.
Yeah.
People, society is great, but society collapses when everyone skips a few meals. Not when a few people, but when the majority of people are hungry, people die. People die, things burn, and people get desperate. And we're going with, inflation and all these horrible COVID policies that we were screaming about at the beginning in April 2020 when I said, okay, guys, enough with these policies. We had 2 months. If you keep doing this, in 18 months from now, you're going to face major supply chain issues and this and this and this and inflation. You cannot do this indefinitely, right? We're now in the 18 months from now.
I think a good book for people to read if they actually kind of want to understand the mentality of a lot of people who push these policies. Because I think, again, some people tend to go in a conspiratorial direction where they, what?
Okay, I'll let you finish.
No, but people tend to go in a conspiratorial direction that I don't agree with, in terms of they assume far more control over everything that in reality anyone can possess. But if you ever read the book, it's a great one, especially if you have an Audible account, you just want to listen to a book. The book Visions of the Anointed, it's from like the late 90s or so. It's by Thomas Sowell, and he goes over several different social and economic pushes in the US in like the 60s, and I think it's also other countries, but in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where people were like pushing sex ed in schools, or people were pushing welfare programs. And I'm not even kidding. In the 60s, the Great Society, or not Great Society, but like the War on Poverty welfare programs were literally meant to try and keep people from going on welfare. Welfare, like the use of like Social Security and people being on the dole, had been falling quite quickly between 1950 and 1960. But then when they implemented all these policies for the welfare in like 64, 65, and welfare like use started spiking, when they were confronted with those realities that what they had done the exact opposite of what they had envisioned, because they think that their vision is the highest form of evidence. If they can envision it, it must be true, even though they had shown that a far greater amount of people had been going on welfare, and that their ideas that, this will help people, give people a hand rather than a handout. They had then claimed that, well, no, more people would have been on welfare if we didn't make these changes that we have made. So we're going to keep doubling down on it. I guarantee you, if we have like a really bad winter around the world, in terms of we were short on food and a lot of people barely made it, or at very least people had to liquidate their bank accounts in order to feed themselves, that you're going to have a lot of people come next summer when these policies have been shown to be destructive, and they're going to be like, well, so many more people would have been hungry if we didn't make these changes, because over fertilization can something hurt agricultural ground and whatnot. So we should double down, because even though they could not show that was a trend at all in history, that we had been producing less food because of more fertilizer, they'll claim it simply to not have to admit that their policies sucked. I don't think that's insidious. I think that it's because people don't like to be wrong, so that they'll always act as if they're somehow still correct. You'll see this in your own life. People will make up petty lies to justify stupid decisions they've made, even if it would just be easier to say, yeah, I was wrong, let's go back to what we were doing before.
Yeah, and I think we have to address that a lot of this is, I think there is an extent, and I do think Justin Trudeau truly believes, and there's a large part of that population who truly believes, no matter how many times all these models and projections never manifest, that climate change will kill us all. That they are going to starve millions today to save billions tomorrow. And I do think that is part of what they are thinking, is millions will die next year, but we'll save billions in the long run by reducing nitrogen emissions because of climate change. And it doesn't matter how many times that the sea level, the entire world will be underwater by the year 2012. The entire world will be underwater by the year 2020, by the year 1980, whatever. And this never manifesting. There is a certain segment of the population that believes this, and there is a certain segment of the population that believes overpopulation is the source of problems, not underproduction. I mean, the example I always point to of this narrative gaining wide societal acceptance is the movie The Avengers Infinity War one. The highly, like, the, I don't know, the biggest box office grossing movie of all time, maybe right? Everyone saw Infinity War. And the way they made Thanos a good villain, right? Good villains have a bit of depth, is you give them a somewhat reasonable motivation. Is he wanted to eliminate half the life on Earth,
or the universe,
the world, right? His logic was, if I kill half the people are bad for the environment, and I will save the environment and whatever by having less people. That would be now. I always said my line to this is why the strongest Avenger would have been Milton Freeman, who instead of flying and punching people could have gone up to Thanos and explained to him why he was wrong in a clear and concise manner. That would have made him the strongest Avenger. But the fact that this sort of anti-human You know, I mean, Justin Trudeau is essentially Thanos, and we kind of enabled
a little bit less strong.
Yeah, less strong, more annoying. You know,
but maybe some say that's his greatest strength.
Yeah, Thanos also never did blackface. So
yeah,
Thanos never painted himself black, stuck a banana down his pants, and then sung the Deo song in an attempt to mock the entire black race, and then lectured people about racism.
And then it did it so many more times he could lost count.
Yeah, Thanos never did that. So point to Thanos. You know, I'm not saying he's great. He did commit a lot of genocide, and that's bad. But he never did blackface and stuck a banana down his pants.
I just want to go something that Michelle said in the comments. I'm not going to bring it up because I'm just more so going off the general idea. It's like I would love any of these people pushing these nitrogen oxide emissions reduction target policies to explain, like, why do you think that farmers use the exact amount of fertilizer that they use? It's like it goes over so many people's heads. Like, maybe the way people do things are done for a reason, especially if it wasn't mandated by the government. The reason that someone under their own free will is using as much fertilizer as they do to produce the crops that they do is probably based on it being more effective. Like, the government's acting as if farmers are just spewing fertilizer all over the place just for the fun of it.
And they're like, laughing maniacally.
Yeah, laughing maniacally. And they're using clearly 30% too much fertilizer. And if they just spread it out more, they'd get the same crops. It's like, no, these people, it's what you would call the wisdom of crowds. These people understand that this is the right amount of fertilizer to use, not because a government bureaucrat or an expert came up and told them that's the right amount to use. They know their field. They know other farmers. Farming has been around for thousands of years, so they know that I need this amount of fertilizer to produce this amount of a crop. They're motivated by wanting, they want to profit at the end of the day. They're not going to spend more money on fertilizer than they have to be safe. So the government mandating a 30% reduction without explaining why this won't affect us is patently absurd. And I think that it's even more absurd that you're going to have no mainstream media journalists for the longest time probably even ask why this is at all realistic to ask farmers to do.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I mean, one of the things I was thinking of, like the way I was putting it in my head is like, it's so clear that no one within the Liberal caucus understands what a farm is. Like they might have gone there for photo ops, but it's so clear that they do not have even the slightest understanding of the economics.
Sorry, there's such a good story tied to this. If anyone knows the weird communist who has his own show on YouTube named Kyle Kalinske, at one point, not a lot of you would ever probably watch him or know much about him. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. He runs Daniel knows who he is. That's why he's laughing.
I also know what you're about to say, but yeah.
He runs a terrible foreign policy show. Doesn't really matter. Big socialist. One time, he was flying over middle America to go to some convention or whatever, and he looked out the window, looked down from the seat of his plane at the ground where he was flying over farmland. And I think anyone who's flown over farmland or knows what farms looked like, there's like different color patches of ground because each of it is a different crop, or sometimes it's a field laid fallow where there's nothing growing on it. And he literally tweeted out after he landed, "What's with all these weird colored squares all over the ground? Do people do this because it looks cool? Is this some sort of like beautification program?" He literally didn't know what farmland looked like. Yet this is someone on his show who tries to pitch himself as an expert on economics
and everything. Yeah,
just everything.
Everyone knows that the only expert on everything is me.
But there's nobody in the Liberal government who won't claim to know how to do someone else's job better than them.
I think that's a pretty good. Yeah, and I knew you were going to give that example of that tweet. I kind of defend that tweet in a way that I do think the view from airplanes is majestic. It is my favorite view in the world. I do think there's nothing more beautiful than looking down at the clouds. To me, it's a great inspiration of what like man can be. But I'm like, he's a
35-year-old man.
Yeah, but like, I'm not like, oh my God, what? When I look at that, I'm like, not, oh my God, what is that? I say, yeah, farms do look beautiful from the air. And I think it looks amazing.
It does, but it never connected in his mind. What's actually happening. But my point is that there's a big blind spot with a lot of these people who think that they know how to tell business owners how to run their businesses better.
Yeah, but like that's the difference between Kyle and I. Is like I think human beings are a good thing. Like I believe the progress of man is remarkable, And I appreciate how far we've come in such a short time. And I think if you have kids, you're not an eco-terrorist. I think you're a good person. If you're good to kids, I think if you have kids and you care for them, I think that makes you a good human being. And I put value on that, and I think that's the difference between Kyle and I fundamentally. But also I knew what a farm was. But I do think farms. I think most things look beautiful from the view of an airplane.
Yeah,
that's why I'm a window seat person.
I'm an aisle seat person. I actually like the middle seat better than the window.
You're a crazy person. But yeah, this is why the window seat's great. Also, you can lean against the window, but like, I will just like spend entire flights. I can't sleep in cars or trains or planes really at all. So I sometimes will spend like hours just looking out the window, daydreaming. Like, we're above the clouds. It's amazing. Okay. Is there anything else in the comments? Again, my screen has committed seppuku. So
so Daniel can't see anything because this computer absolutely dies every once in a while. But Allison Spears wants to know, what kind of crops feed the crickets?
Soy crops. I'm just guessing.
Yeah. I guarantee you there's going to be like so much backlash against that big facility in London, Ontario, that's literally producing crickets for human consumption, when people probably find out how much like food that goes into just feeding crickets, something that nobody wants to eat.
Yeah. And like I had always said, even before like the World Economic Forum was like, you will eat the bugs and you will like it. I mean, bugs is always my thing of like, well, like when everyone's like, oh, food supply, everything will collapse. And I'm like, well, actually, like the fact that we have bugs is good. Like eventually, like when push comes to shove, people will figure out how to, eat bugs. But also like the type of bugs we're going to eat. Like if people are, my thought behind this was, okay, seafood. Like if I told you to eat bugs right now, you'd be like, gross. And also like it's the people telling you to eat the bugs are the worst people ever. But if I told you to eat shrimp and lobster right now, you'd be like, sweet, like dope. I love it. Right. But they're pretty similar, like shrimp, lobster, arthropods. They're essentially sea insects. I always said, like chickens are my high school education and university stuff. It's not natural selection, artificial selection, artificially selected for. Like we created chickens as humans and cows. Like we created these things like to be consumed. Like we farm them, right? Cows, like a friggin' cow's not going to survive, 50,000 years ago when there's a saber-toothed tiger roaming around. Like a cow, you fence it in, you protect it, it's human. We could do the same to bugs if we needed to, and we could easily come up with a cheap bug that tastes like shrimp. Like that's what we should be putting our resources into. Like if someone was smart, be like, okay, here's bugs that kind of taste like shrimp. It's imitation shrimp. It's a form of a grub. But yeah, and you don't force people to eat it, but people will eventually be like, okay, if shrimp is, $4.75 per pound, let's say, whatever, and imitation shrimp, these grubs are, 85 cents a pound. Eventually someone's going to be like, okay,
or like I can cook this into some sort of pancake patty or something like that. It tastes absolutely fine. Or I can cook and there has more protein or whatever. Like,
yeah, you fried rice with this and you mix it with other things. And like,
we're not pushing eating insects anyone. If anyone's listening to this after the fact, we're just talking about how on the general idea of eating insects, it's not bad inherently, but it's inherently bad to try and engineer an economy to try and make people eat them.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is like they're forcing it on us, and like the weird video of like Nicole Kidman like eating insects with this glassy-eyed psychopathic look with like chopsticks. And like,
who's the weird guy who played Tony Stark in the Avengers? I just never remember his name.
Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, Robert Downey Jr. He just went like, it wasn't Jimmy Kimmel's show, it was someone else's show, and he was like talking about eating crickets. Like, okay, this is a little bit creepy that everyone seems to be getting the same email info dumps on what they should be talking about this week. So it's like one of those things. If the WEF does not want me to eat more steak, I will immediately start doing that. If they want me to eat bugs, I will continue not doing that. I'm generally not going to do any stupid things that people are telling me to do when they have some weird, creepy vision of how the world should be behind it. Like, I'm going to do what I want when I want.
Yeah. And like, I'm not sure, it's not crickets. I think it's like, isn't like fried grasshoppers a Southern delicacy? So like,
Or like people, I've had, you can buy grasshoppers that taste like barbecue or whatever. And I remember I had some of that in grade 5, and they're actually not that bad. But as soon as Klaus Schwab wants me to eat them for some sort of
Yeah,
weird
F you, Klaus.
internationalist, so yeah, some sort of internationalist vision of like a perfect utopia, I will start eating more cows in
Yeah,
spite.
like, I'm like that. It's like I could get behind, again, like I said, if there was reasonably, and like I do believe that there are, had it been left alone, by the next decade or so, you would start to see free market incentives for people to eat some good
I
bugs, and then
guarantee
have
health food
people
stores.
farm bugs in a cheap way that tastes like food we're familiar with.
I guarantee that in health food stores in 10 years would have already been doing grasshopper type things. Like, oh, we just put it into this fried potato pancake and immediately now it has a bunch of protein in it or something like that. Like, it would probably be kind of thing anyways. Maybe certain people would still consider it weird. Maybe I still consider it weird and stick to whatever I usually eat. But it's like, it's just kind of like soy products, although to a certain extent, people shouldn't overconsume those. But it's like anything that you maybe hadn't eaten in the past 30 years of your life. It might have just become a normal thing that people would have done anyways, like certain types of seafood. Like, I assume most people watching this now have never had sea urchin and maybe don't want to try it. I think it's good. But if people were then trying to push it as like the new thing that people should eat, I would probably stop, because it's kind of weird that everyone's trying to make everything a trend in terms of like global solidarity.
Yeah, like when you need to pull out, when you look at the Jeffrey Epstein flight log and you get those people that start telling me to eat the bugs. Yeah, that's not the best strategy. I was just saying, I do think there was a potential free market incentive, if left alone, to create cheap, high quality insects within a decade or two that could have been good for society. But now it's so politically tied in that like, again, this is what happens when you try and mess and force economies instead of letting the free market come. They're not doing what I said they should be doing, which is, taking insect-like foods, which is seafood, for a lot, like, shellfish. Crab is delicious. Lobster is delicious. Shrimp is delicious. Some people might not like it. That's fine. But they're generally thought of as, high-class foods, right? Expensive foods, right? They're very similar to insects and grubs. Like, there is a way to manufacture, just as we created chickens to be delicious and like they don't fly, they don't do anything, but we eat them. There was a way to make the insect version of chickens, and we're not doing that. We're instead just saying, here's mealworms. This is the cheapest BS we have. Here's just a gross pile of friggin' worms that are still alive. Eat them. We'll ground them into a protein powder. It's the only protein you're allowed. These gross worms. And you're like, no. That's not what I had in mind. This is not what Daniel said in the year 2007. This is not what I was talking about. It's just gross.
Oh, hey, I just want to quickly mention this. Maybe this would be a great little mini thing to end on. So I think everyone's noticed like food shortages every once in a while, either because of supply chains or some countries where food shortages are genuinely happening. Have you ever noticed that every single time you see photos of grocery stores, it's the meat alternatives, like the impossible meat type products that are never taken off the shelves?
Yeah, somehow those survive the panic buying.
I guarantee you, a lot of people would prefer to starve than start eating that stuff. I heard it was like carcinogenic in like a very active way, not like technically broccoli's carcinogenic. I mean, like, don't eat more than like 2 grams of like that fake meat or you're gonna die kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
anyway,
you can have veggie burgers. Like, my mom's a vegetarian. We had a family barbecue a couple weeks ago.
I don't mind veggie burgers. They're good, especially if they're mostly made of like mushrooms and stuff like that. Yeah. Anyways, maybe that's a great place to end off on. See everyone next week, when we'll probably be talking about something that doesn't involve bugs or veggie burgers, and we'll be back to more normal news topics like the start of the show. But I know that Daniel can no longer see his screen, so I'm editing it off for him. We're going to be trying to do more shows going into the future. Sometimes we're just really busy, so we haven't been, but we'll be trying to do that more often. I'll be trying to make more pre-recorded content, and Daniel's probably going to do more written content. But until then, see everyone next time.